In today's world, the term made in obsolete. Usually products are made out of components that come from many countries. So that's illicit trade. It's also international.
Maybe define for us a little bit. When you say illicit trade, how broad is that definition?
It's hard to say ex ante what products are illicit because it changes a lot. If you are a criminal, you look for money that is big, that is easy. You don't think so much, oh, what kind of illicit good is it? Kind of weigh the risk on the one hand and profits on the other hand.
It's really about monetizing, thinking about how to monetize and how fast you can do it.
Yes.
And that risk and reward.
Throughout my career, I was often surprised with new streams or new waves of illicit trade, right? There is illicit trade in waste, for example, and there is illicit trade in sand. There's so many illicit goods.
Oh, we catch a segment of illicit trade. Right? We don't identify all, we identify a small segment, probably.
There are no, I would say, official data. Enforcement does not collect data for statisticians.
What are some of your bigger challenges that you face in your role?
So providing member countries of illicit trade is a challenge.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Piotr. We're excited to have you with us today. We're looking forward to learning about what you do and how you do it and how you got to where you're at today. But before I get going on the questions, I did want to ask you, if you could be a fly on the wall and listen in on anybody's conversation, where would you land and whose conversation would you love to hear?
That's a great question. So when I was a kid, I was, in a school, and right next to us, there was a small booth that was selling lottery tickets. And that was sort of, how hobby or a habit to buy a lottery ticket every time there was a new draw. And my colleagues had this conspiracy theory that not in this booth, but somewhere in the city center of Warsaw, there is someone choosing the numbers before the drawing is made. Well, we wanted to know who that person is and to know the numbers in advance. So to answer your question, if I was a fly in the wall, I would like to be in that room and know the numbers in advance. I can pick the 6 correct numbers.
Yeah, I think we'd all want to do that. That'd be great. So, we're going to learn a little bit about what you're doing in today's world at the OECD, but tell us what you wanted to be when you grow up, or when you grew up, or maybe even what you want to be when you grow up. If you haven't finished, what would you like to do if you haven't done it, or what did you think about doing as a young person?
That's an excellent question, right? So my plans kept changing every 5 months. I remember at one point I wanted to be a sailor, policeman, soldier. That was my primary school dreams. Then I was actually more into science, right? And I wanted to be a mathematician or a physicist. Well, I had not enough patience to pursue this career path, and eventually did my PhD in economics and econometrics. So that was at least partially fulfilling my goals, and I found it to be really fascinating, right? So, and it hasn't changed. I still like economics. I think that I'm an economist, right? I consider myself to be an economist. Yeah. But like today, what I want to be a good dad for my kids, so and good husband to my wife, right? So that's my main goal.
Well, listen, that's an admirable goal. So I think you seem to be. It sounds like you're focused on all the right spots for sure. And how did you decide, this profession? In terms of what you're doing with the OECD, did that sort of happen on you, or is that something you were specifically targeting?
That's a good question. Looking back, I think it was more learning by doing, right? Of course, when I was a kid, I didn't know that OECD exists. Right? I've learned. I would say, the more I learn about illicit trade and problems associated with illicit trade and governance to counter illicit trade, then I would say the more I redefine my role, right? I keep asking myself, Piotr, what can you do actually to help the situation, right? So it's not like I knew in advance, this is my job. I want to be, a tailor and make suits. It's like, I feel like I have some tools, right? I'm an economist. I know some policy tools. I know how to interpret data, and every day I'm learning how to employ these tools, right, to fulfill OECD's mission: better policies for better lives.
And Piotr, maybe tell us, what was your first job? Obviously you didn't, dream of working for the OECD at one point, but as you got your PhD and became an economist, What was a little like a picture of the
Hmm.
path? Like, how did you get there?
Right. So I was with the academia first. I was a research assistant at the university in the Netherlands. Then I remember one day I got a phone call from the OECD that was looking for someone for like a very short temporary job to work on, well, econometric modeling of counterfeiting and trading counterfeit goods. That's how I started, right? So I began my policy career with the OECD as an econometrician, right? So data analyst. So it was a
Yeah.
small step from academia to OECD. And once I joined the OECD boat, I realized it's more than that. It's more just modeling, it's more than answering questions about the scale and magnitude. My contract was extended, then extended once more, and eventually converted into a permanent contract, right?
Yeah. So how many years are you now with the OECD?
It's been 16 years, more than 16 years.
Well, it's a wonderful career. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And for those of us listening, we have a pretty broad audience from around the world who listen to our podcast. There may be some folks that do not know what the OECD is and where you're based, and where is the OECD based, and where are people. So maybe a little background just on the business itself, so that those who may not know what that is, you share with us.
Right. So OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is a Paris-based international organization, right? So this is a public institution, and we are funded by member countries. Right? So it's not a private think tank; it's a public think and do tank. Our main role, well, we are economists and statisticians. Our main role is coordination of economic policies. It's to basically provide our member countries with objective and unbiased pictures of what's going on with economic policies and its various aspects. It ranges from education, labor, trade, steel, shipbuilding, well, illicit goods, but also illicit trade. Right? So my small niche.
Sure. And if you had to like sum it up as a one sentence, or maybe two sentences, how do you compact that the organization in terms of what it does or what it stands for?
Right. So what we do is we coordinate economic policies, member countries of the OECD. We gauge them and we provide so unbiased factual advices. Let me also highlight that there are like 30 plus members of OECD. So it's not like UN that
Sure.
gathers all countries. I would say 20 years ago that would be called industrialized countries. Now it's countries that on the list of GDP per capita are in the upper half, right? So it's US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, most EU countries, Israel, Chile, Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, right? Those are OECD members.
And when you think of your role as the senior economist there in the illicit goods area, what are some of your bigger challenges that you face in your role?
That's a very good question. First, let me clarify. It's not my ambition to influence, right, policies. I would rather see myself as a, well, I don't know, physician that tries to provide member countries with diagnosis, right? And it's they who decide what to do, or even not a physician. I'm just like an X-ray operator, right? I try to X-ray the situation and give member countries objective picture of what's going on, and that's the biggest challenge, right? I deal with illicit trade. Data are hard to find, so providing member countries with objective picture of illicit trade is a challenge. So to make an X-ray of the situation, that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, I would imagine because it's illicit, there's no public data,
Yeah.
really. I mean, at the end of the day, you really have to, well, I shouldn't say there's no public data, but there's probably limited public data because we don't catch it all. We catch a segment of illicit trade, right? In terms of what law enforcement may do around the
Right,
world. We don't identify all, we identify a small
right.
segment, probably.
I mean, there are no, I would say, official data, right? There are public data
Yeah,
that were collected
right.
not for the purpose of enhancing understanding of illicit trade, right? Like enforcement does not collect data for statisticians. They collect data for
Yes.
them, right, to improve efficiency of their actions. So I would say there are public data, but these data are not, I would say, official in a sense. They were not collected for the purpose of better information.
And maybe Piotr, if you can maybe define for us a little bit again for those listening who may not, quite have their arms around it. When you say illicit trade, in the work that you do. It's a pretty broad term in terms of what are illicit,
Right,
trade, because we can think of, human trafficking, or we
right.
could think
Hmm.
of, you know, all those things. In your, I guess, I don't know, definition, or the things that you work on specifically, or maybe even the organization works on, how broad is that definition of illicit trade?
That's a very good question. Look, I'm an economist, right? And I'm not a lawyer.
Yes.
Sometimes I say it with a bit of pride. I'm not a lawyer. I'm an economist,
Nor am I.
which means that, well, I realize that definitions are extremely important, but sometimes they also might set very tight boundaries to what actually we measure, what we define as a problem, right? So I work usually with enforcement people. So delegates from OECD member countries, from enforcement communities come to my meetings, together with people from trade communities and from, say, industry communities, right? For illicit trade is what customs look at, something that violates laws and regulations, right? It's hard to say ex ante what products are illicit because it changes a lot, right? So, but I would say that in practical terms, we look at such illicit goods as counterfeit products, substandard products, wildlife trafficking, products where some taxes were not paid, right? But also fake medicines, narcotics, opioids, right? I mean, let me put it like this. If you're a criminal, you look for money that is big, that is easy. And well, you don't think so much, oh, what kind of illicit good is it? Or is it illicit trade? Is it illegal trade? You kind of weigh the risk on the one hand and the profits on the other hand, right? So, and
Right.
throughout my career,
It's sort of the
yeah, throughout my career, I was
oh, I'm
often
sorry.
surprised with new streams or new like, waves of illicit trade, right? There is illicit trade in waste, for example. There is illicit trade in sand, right? So
Sure.
so many illicit
Yeah,
goods.
yeah. I always think about it, that it's really about monetizing, to your point, as bad actors or bad guys, thinking about how to monetize and how fast you can do it,
Yes,
and that risk and reward, right? And
precisely,
it's about speed of taking something and turning it into cash and disappearing, or whatever it takes, right?
precisely, precisely.
And I'm, yes. And so when you think of, I don't know, are there a couple, two, three strategies that you think about in terms of taking on the combating of illicit trade? Is there a couple, three strategies that you suggest to member countries, or how does that go?
That's an excellent question. Well, firstly, there is a difference between gauging the problem and suggesting a solution, right? I've heard that some smart people were saying that those that gauge and monitor the problem are usually not those that provide a solution. Yeah, kind of, cross-check.
Yes, yeah,
So I can tell you what are currently the strategies taken by companies to counter illicit trades in counterfeits, for example, or by countries, right? But I don't think I'm the one really to tell countries what to do, right? It would go beyond my mandate. I can just facilitate their
sure,
actions, right? So certainly illicit trade is a global problem. It's not one country, it's not two countries, it's usually many countries involved. Because firstly, today production and trade are global phenomena, right? In today's world, the term made in is obsolete. Usually products are made out of components that come from many countries, and trade, supply chains are also international, right? And so does illicit trade. It's also international. So countering illicit trade is an international effort, which means that first coordination is essential. Coordination of information exchange, coordination of enforcement efforts, and coordination of, I would say, exchange of information on existing gaps. Gaps in terms of abuses of modern trade routes or modern shipment techniques. So the coordination is the essential component. And apart from that, the second one is awareness raising. Illicit trade changes very quickly. There are new, really sometimes very surprising channels, goods, modus operandi, like illicit trade in waste.
yeah, makes sense. And when you, I guess, approach, when you have your meetings and people are coming to
Mm-hmm.
listen to some of the data, I'm assuming that I work with a lot of brand professionals in the brand protection space. How do you intersect with those experts in the brand who are for their own brand, fighting to reduce the risk and the prevalence of counterfeits? How do they intersect with you and the OECD?
Good point, right? So private sector is essential here, right? Brands have knowledge that we don't have. So it's extremely important to talk to brands, to talk to brand experts, to understand what are ongoing problems. OECD and the task force on countering illicit trade are very inclusive, right? We are like a table, and everybody's invited to join, have a coffee or tea, and talk, right? So we have a dedicated, I would say, committee called Business at OECD, and all industry actors are warmly invited to join our meetings. And there's nothing to hide. We don't have any, enforcement power, right? It's just trust building and information sharing.
Right.
And to follow up on this question, I'm indeed talking a lot to brand associations, to industry associations, and I see several strategies they employ to counter illicit trade, right? Ranging from really awareness raising through, I would say, enforcement actions like chasing bad guys, closing websites that offer illicit goods, or hiring investigators. But unfortunately, some companies decide to, I would say, neglect or ignore the problem, right? Considering this is, as I say, tax on their actions.
Sure. And I think that's sort of the formula for why, there's a need for collaboration, right? From different areas and different expertises to solve a problem like this.
Absolutely.
Makes a lot of sense. So, Jane Durden, who is the former director of trademarks and brand protection at TTI, which is Tektronix Technology Industry, and they make power tools and vacuum cleaners, and they make a lot of cool different consumer electronics. But she had a question that she wanted to learn about you that she thought would be interesting. And what she wanted to know is, what are the commonalities and even the differences in your approach country by country when you think of counterfeits, like in terms of how you might approach one country and another country, or because everybody thinks about this problem differently. How do you approach that?
That's a very good question, right? So, firstly, I must underscore that the task force is within the OECD, right? So, we work mostly with OECD countries who suffer from that problem,
Yes.
right? So, if you look at the map of trade in counterfeit goods, most of these goods come from China. China is not a member of the OECD, right? So, our member countries are those who suffer from this problem. Our member countries have companies that are innovative and that suffer from this problem. Regarding the question, it's a very good question, right? And to me, approaches taken by countries reflect the structure of economies of these countries. There are some countries that are, I would say, rather small, innovative, and export-oriented, such as, for instance, Sweden. Such country
Yes.
suffers from counterfeiting, but this is not a threat that happens in Sweden, right? This is an external threat. So I would say Swedish companies are those that tend to focus on enforcement. Those companies might hire investigators, engage international actions to raise awareness, or be active in international industry associations. Then you have countries like, well, say Italy, right? That's also innovative, very powerful in terms of brand power. Sorry for this redundancy. But at the same time, Italy has many small and medium enterprises, right? So here I would say Italian government acts as a catalyst for these actions, and it's very active internationally, looking for coordination of actions, but also seeking bilaterally for, I would say, actions with those countries that might have bad guys within their boundaries. There are some countries that are big enough to have attaches dedicated to enforcement, IP enforcement, that, for
Sure.
instance, UK or France. And then there's, of course, United States, that is big and that managed to have fantastic coordinated actions within the US. I'm talking here about IPR Center or IPEC, right? So dedicated bodies to coordinate not only domestic policies, but also become some sort of, I would say, centers of gravity for global policies in that respect.
Yes, for sure. When you think you mentioned being a good dad to your kids, but I think about often as we're in this position of having You particularly having built a successful career, what kind of advice would you give to young people who are, whether they want a career like yours or whether they just want to be successful in whatever they're doing? What would your advice be to young people as they start to approach their career?
Well, who am I to advise, right? I can just think like what would be advice I could give to myself if I had like a magic.
Your younger
Yes,
self, yeah.
be more patient, Piotr. I would say be more patient, right? I mean, it's not like at one point you will get a prize and throughout your career you just bid for this prize, right? Life is beautiful. There's many good things happening throughout the whole life process. So be more patient, right? And be also open-minded. As I said, until I was, I don't know, maybe 20, I didn't know that OECD does exist, right? So it's not like you need to
Sure.
create your plans like from the scratch as of the beginning. No, it's be patient, be open-minded, and enjoy your life the way it is.
Yeah, so that's great advice. I think that's great advice for any young person. I think globally that's great advice for any young person, whether you're in Paris or in the United States or in Poland. Those are good advices. When you think back about your career, and this sort of as one of two final questions for you, but is there someone who inspired you along the way? Is there someone who you looked up to as you were building your career?
Well, of course, I was lucky enough to have many great bosses, many great managers, right? Um, and I think this is a question of attitude. Maybe I was actually patient, right? Maybe I was a patient. Maybe I wasn't modest, but I was patient. I was willing to learn, right? So I think there's lots of great people around everyone, right? So it's just a matter of willing to learn from those who seem to be old farts, but actually these old farts often have something to say, right? Or maybe they act in
Yes,
a
they
modest
do.
way that could be inspiring, right? So if you're willing to learn, there will be always someone who can inspire you. And I was lucky. I was lucky to have great people around me, and I can just name a few. Danis Korpeci, who passed away a few years ago, he was one of my first managers at the OECD. Peter Avery, who's still active, great guy from Washington, right? And John Cox, he was actually one of my first managers back in at my first internship at Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Well, listen, it's wonderful to mention their names. Well, that's important. So here's my last question for you today, which is: after your podcast, we're going to be speaking with Colette from 3M. What would be a good question to ask Colette so that we can learn about her personal story or her journey? What would you like to
Oh
learn?
wow, that's a great question. So she's at 3M, great company, fantastic company, innovative, forward thinking. But at the same time, well, from my naive perspective, such companies are usually protecting their inventions with patents, with trade secrets. They try to kind of keep their technical mumbo jumbos within the house, right? At the same time, anti-illicit trade actions require collaboration, require some opening of information, at least with customs, so that customs can tell fake from genuine very quickly, right?
Sure.
How would she manage this trade-off?
Private to public information or
Exactly.
whatever.
Keeping secrecy of company, all this information within the house, but at the same time collaborate with public enforcement and also other companies, right? To learn, hey, there's a new counterfeit that looks like this. Do we have similar problems, guys?
Great question. Well, listen, we're going to be sure to ask Colette that question, and that'll be another fascinating podcast. So, Piotr, thank you for your time today. It was fascinating to learn about you, to learn about your work at the OECD, and we thank you for your time
Thank you
today.
for having me. Thank you so much.